Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Continuous Discussions, the online forum where we talk about Agile, DevOps, and continuous delivery. I'm Sam Fell.
And I'm Anders Wahlgren. And today we have the second in our series of DevOps Enterprise Summit speakers coming to join us, and Gene Kim as well, to talk about what they're going to talk about at the summit in October. So we're pretty excited to do that.
We are very excited to see what the programming committee has cooked up. Gene, would you like to introduce all the panelists?
And in fact, no, we're going to do something even better than that. We're going to have every panelist introduce themselves. So let's go round robin. In fact, I'll introduce myself. Gene Kim. I was co-author of the Phoenix Project, DevOps Handbook, more recently Accelerates. Been studying high-performing technology organizations for 20 years. And it's been so fun to be part of the DevOps enterprise journey, and my thanks to Electric Cloud for making that happen from the very beginning. I'd love to go round robin and have each one of the panelists introduce themselves. Could you say your name, company role, and maybe what has made the DevOps Enterprise Summit worthwhile for you in the past? Why don't we start with, I'll just go from my left to right. We'll do Sean Norris, J. Paul Reed, and then Mirko Herring.
Hey, Gene.
Hello.
I'm having some video trouble, but hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
I run cloud infrastructure services at Standard Chartered Bank. I'm based in Singapore, and I'm going to be giving a reprise of the talk that I gave in London earlier in the year at the DOES Summit there. And it's really about next-gen ops that we're, applying some DevOps principles at the bank and kind of diving into some specific use cases.
And by the way, how was the London experience for you?
The London experience was fantastic. A bit nerve-wracking, my first time speaking at a DOES conference, but I really enjoyed it.
Fantastic. Let's go with, okay, Mirko, you're up.
Hello, Mirko Herring. I'm looking after our modern engineering practice for Asia Pacific, working for Accenture. Also an author recently. DevOps for the Modern Enterprise. I've propped it. And I tend to speak about the DevOps transformation challenges. So my job basically brings me into critical and not so well going transformations and help them fix it up. So I get the experience from the cutting edge.
Awesome. J. Paul Reed.
Hey, Paul Reed. I work for a company called Release Engineering Approaches. I'm the founder and managing partner there. So I get to the running joke is I work for everyone and no one at the same time. So I get to see a lot of different environments, a lot of different companies. You'd ask kind of what brought you to DevOps Enterprise Summit and how you found it useful. I was thinking back to the first one. I think I've been to all of the ones in San Francisco, and it's interesting to see what's very similar in an enterprise context and DevOps, or what's similar about kind of the DevOps transformation and journey for enterprises, and what's actually very different. So that's something every year there's new information and new stories to tell, and that's what keeps me coming back every year. And this year I'm going to be speaking a little bit about continuous improvement, actually, because I've been doing a lot of work, and I just finished up my master's in human factors and system safety. So
you finished?
I did finish, yeah.
Following the exact footsteps of John Allspaw.
Mr. Allspaw, yes, yeah.
Fantastic. Well, that's great. In fact, let's talk about the programming objectives. Sam, why don't we go on to the next slide? By the way, I recently read something someone said, in order to speak clearly, you have to be able to think clearly, and that means often you have to be able to write clearly. So this is something I shared with the programming committee in terms of our program objectives for this year. One was to get great experience reports, and something that I think is unique to DevOps Enterprise Summit is we get repeat experience reports. So I think the basis for this is that, as adult learners, as leaders, I think we tend to learn less from experts who tell us what to do, right? Instead, we really learn from watching what other people have done to solve certain problems. And then the notion of the repeat experience reports is that we can actually see, follow these leaders in their careers year over year and see, what's working, what's not working for them. And that's been an incredibly gratifying thing to do. The second area of emphasis is next generation operations and infrastructure. This is really came out of a comment that Jason Cox from Disney has said for 4 years in a row, which was, hey, great conference for developers, but maybe not as great for operations. And so for 4 years in a row, I told him, all right, we'll try harder next year. But this last time around, we decided to do something differently. We reserved 25% of the talks just for next generation operations and infrastructure concerns. And I thought it was, really brought a different flavor to the conference. We continue our focus on stories that show how we can span the business and technology divide. And fourth is that we'll talk a little bit more about later, is really seeking out the experts, the best subject matter experts from the domains that we want to learn from and draw upon. And then a specific goal around really helping conference attendees achieve their own goals. So I guess that really should be the top one. But the notion that, what can we do besides just selecting talks in terms of really helping attendees, create the greatest experience for them. And as Damon Edwards, another programming committee member, said, as semi-professional conference goers, right? I think we've all been in situations where the conference has done things that have made it really great for attendees, and have done other times make it very difficult for attendees. So that's the specific set of objectives we have had for the London conference and for the upcoming U.S. conference. I guess what the question I'd love to have for the panel is specifically around next generation operations and infrastructure. I was actually really surprised to see how different that focus, how it changed entire programming. Sean, you were a part of that. Could you opine on that in terms of sort of your thoughts on why it made the conference programming so different? And that's a question mark. If it's appeared,
it was interesting. It certainly resonated with me. I mean, I've been an ops guy most of my career, and I've spent enough time with dev teams that I feel like I can, play on both sides of that fence. But I really came up and kind of, cut my teeth in IT on the ops side, and it did feel like the dev was a lot more prevalent in DevOps than the ops. And some of the cynical development teams maybe I ran across felt that DevOps just meant no ops and we can just do everything ourselves. And so it was great to hear stories of folks who are kind of fighting through challenging situations in large complex organizations, of how they kind of apply those principles but working from the ops side.
By the way, Sean, one of the things that I didn't quite realize, but and tell me if my recollection is correct on this, is that so you're in charge of the cloud infrastructure for Standard Chartered, but before that, you actually had full operational responsibility for a good chunk of the operations organization. Was it the middleware?
Yeah, so it's kind of an interesting story. I joined the bank about a year and a half ago, and I was running all of production application support for the retail bank, private banking, and wealth management. So for a portfolio of probably 250 applications with about several hundred people doing application support. So we were basically running all of those applications in production. That was everything from mainframes to, stuff in between, to modern kind of microservice applications running in containers and OpenShift.
Right. So it seems like you are in a position of unique credibility, right? You're not just running the unicorn cloud stuff, right? This is with the weight of experience of having been responsible for those 250 plus applications. Well,
I'd say it certainly gave me a good insight into how much work there is to do. We're like a lot of large enterprise organizations, and like I talked about in the talk, we're really optimized for compliance and adhering to rules and checklists, and not really optimized for speed. So it takes a long time to get things done. Being a bank and highly regulated, we need to be safe as we do that. But we've got lots of room for improvement.
That was awesome. It was one of my favorite talks from DevOps Enterprise London. Anders, I mean, going back from the beginning, I mean, I'd love your thoughts in terms of like the contrast, if any, right, between the programming with the ops focus versus that without.
I mean, I think it's, I've always kind of joked, but somewhat seriously, that this is the the DevOps support group. Hi, my name is Anders. I do DevOps. Hi, Anders. That sort of thing. And I think that's the greatest aspect of it for me. And then, is it a dev problem or an ops problem? I mean, I could certainly see how it easily gets very dev centric, and I think part of that has to do with just the influence that application architectures have on your ability to to do CD, to do rapid deployments and those kinds of things. But I think it's it's time to get to sort of shift that perspective a little bit more and make sure that we're hearing all sides of the story. I was about to say both sides of the story, but of course, there's two sides to any interesting story. And so yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be great, and I think there definitely has been kind of that. Like a little bit of that feel that the dev is trying to just bum rush ops, and take over the world and let the inmates run the asylum. But that's I don't think that's anybody's goal, quite frankly. But it may look like that sometimes. So it's going to be great to see the contrast. Quite frankly, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
By the way, just I know, Anders, I know I told you this before, but I mean, it was really interesting that we set up a different programming committee just for that, and just to see the politicking going on in terms of like, all right, given the fixed number of talk allocations, in the ops track, our goal was to take as many talks and try to push them onto the other programming committee so it wouldn't count against our budget. I mean, it's just interesting how that even in simple, you have two groups, how they interact. Mirko.
Yeah, so I think it's actually a really good time for this to come up because, well, there's really two reasons. One, and you saw that in London already, is how much we talk about the data in DevOps and using that to make decisions, right? So that's a very kind of opsy thing that we have our own platform that we use with Splunk, where all of a sudden you have information available that you just didn't have before. And then the second one, which I find personally super exciting about Ops, is Ops is the space where you do things more than once, right? So in kind of dev, every time you're solving a new problem, in Ops is where you see the same kind of tickets coming through, standing up the same kind of environment. The best place for automation, and that's even more exciting now, the place where you can play around with AI and machine learning and so forth to actually optimize, including these kind of new technologies. So I was sitting now next to a friend of mine who runs our platform, and it's just so cool what he does. Like he's working with universities and get PhD candidates in to help with new algorithms, and it's all because the data is there now and it's the repeatability of it. So I'm super excited about that space.
Yeah, right. And it seems like the whole notion of the platform, right, where you have a bunch of internal customers, and now you get to the value exchange, right? It's like we take a bunch of problems off your hands. You solve, they benefit from having their problem solved, but then being a central service, allows you to solve problems across many domains, right?
Exactly.
Awesome. J. Paul Reed. So any thoughts on focus on operations and next generation infrastructure?
Yeah. Well, so I find the term that is used, next generation operations and infrastructure, particularly interesting because one of the big shifts that I think we have all seen, specifically in operations, is the sort of realization or discussions that are happening around not just the technology or the architecture of our infrastructure and all of that, but the actual people in the system, right? This idea that we don't operate technical systems, we operate socio-technical systems, the people part. So you see a lot of conversations around, okay, well, how do we make that, the Google SRE book talked about toil and reducing toil, which is a very sort of interesting kind of way to describe an inhumane versus maybe a humane way to run infrastructure and operations, right? So the shift that I think is super interesting, and we saw this last year with John Allspa's talk around retrospectives, postmortems, dissecting an incident. What does that look like? Root cause, is that what we should be looking for? Is that going to save us when we talk about root cause? All of those sorts of things dovetail really nicely into this sort of idea of what does it look when we're running microservices, and what does next gen infrastructure look like. But the entire concept of sort of the discussion around next gen operations really is including discussions about the people. That's the part I find most interesting.
Absolutely. Any thoughts on that? Otherwise, let's talk about kind of another area of programming focus. Sean, you good? Excellent. Okay, perfect. So, I think we were talking about the community. I mean, I think what has always impressed me about the DevOps Enterprise community is how it is a community of lifelong learners. I've mentioned before, it's always been fun for me to look at the bookshelves of people in the community, and it's surprising similarities in them, right? I mean, there's good to great, there's the goal, there's getting to yes. I mean, there's this, and my interpretation of that is that, you know, we're all sort of trying to cobble together our own bodies of knowledge to achieve our goals, where there really isn't one right now. And so I think one of the goals for the conference has been always to find the best experts outside of our domain that we want to learn from. So this year we have invited and speaking Dr. Christina Maslach. So she's, for her entire career, has studied workplace burnout, work-life balance, and employee engagement. And so that's something of incredible importance, I think, to many of us in the community, especially John Willis, who's on a programming committee. Dr. Stephen Spear, who studied the Toyota production system, and that was the focus of his PhD dissertation at the Harvard Business School. He'll be returning. He spoke in 2015. And one of the things that has been a focus for the community is the notion of how do we get away from kind of classic project management orthodoxies to more product-oriented ways of managing. And so we looked for experts in lean accounting. And so one of the people who will be speaking is Steve Player. He was a former partner of the cost management practice at Arthur Andersen. He's on one of the people on the leading edge, maybe I should say bleeding edge, of the beyond budgeting movement. And so he'll be speaking and really teaching us about everything from, you know, how do we get finance people on board, and really educate us on, you know, how do we even begin to become conversant in the topics we need to in order to have those kind of weighty discussions. So my question to the panel is really, you know, what are your observations? Do my observations around the community resonate with you? And any thoughts on the panelists? And if you're interested in it, why? Why don't we do, sorry, I'll publish out the order in the Google Doc next time. Why don't we do Mirko, Sean, Anders, and J. Paul Reed?
Perfect. Yeah, I find the DevOps community incredible. Right? It's so when I fell into the community, it was just amazing on how easy it is to talk to everyone. And perhaps that's what you say, right? We all have common references, right? It's like, it's not that you're getting somewhere and you talk about completely new stuff. Like, we read similar books, watched similar talks. It just makes it incredibly easy. And then coming from a company that traditionally, certainly like 5 years ago, wouldn't have necessarily shared a lot, it's just incredible to see that everyone shares. That it's not about, you know, this is our secret sauce that, you know, only we have. It's like, no, we have a big problem to solve in the community. So why don't we all share what we're doing? Enough problem for all of us. So I find that incredible. And then I think you're absolutely right. Talking to people outside, it's then incredible what you can learn from them and adapt into your world, right? So I'm doing a leadership retreat tomorrow, and one of the videos I'm using is David Marquette's video around the talks, because I find that incredible, that humility and getting that across to people. I think, if you can do it in a quick submarine, like how difficult should it be for you to do that in an IT context where really no lives are at risk?
Yeah. Exactly. By the way, just as a side note, one of the comments we get from kind of the speakers that we invite in is, I don't know much about DevOps. And my response is always, don't worry. That's not your job. Our job is to take your expertise and bridge it to our domain, and just absolve them of any responsibility to know anything about what we do. It's, I think, something surprising to the speakers we invite. Sean.
Well, that makes me feel much better, because I definitely place myself in that camp. It's an interesting one. I had the good luck of being at your very first DevOps conference in, I think it was 2015 in San Francisco, and then I was at the one last year in San Francisco, and now again in London. So across three of them, you can really see that the whole movement is gaining traction. Like, you have more people from larger companies attending each time of being, but even from the beginning, the kind of like high quality to miscellaneous fluff ratio is very, very good. Like, it's about the exact opposite of most conferences I go to, where you kind of go and there's maybe 1 in 5 sessions that are really good. It's the opposite of that whenever I've been. So I found it really good because pretty much I can sit there for the whole day. I end up with a notebook full of like 7 or 8 pages of notes, and I think, wow, the day went by really fast. Where it's not one of those ones where you get past lunchtime and you're kind of struggling to stay awake and jet lag and coffee and that. So I found the actual experience of being there and being on the other side of the world in Asia. I don't think the community is maybe as mature or developed over here yet as it is in North America, but to kind of come over and be immersed in it for a few days at a time has been really good.
That's interesting. I mean, I think one of the comments I've gotten is that people who do attend, they find it very energizing because they are surrounded by kindred spirits, where there is no, they're not the crazy people for 3 days and have to head back where it is a lot of convincing, right? Convincing other people to get on board. Awesome, Paul.
Yeah, one thing that you said, a couple things you said stuck with me, kind of in that intro is this idea of taking ideas from other operational contexts, and I think not only is that super useful, but what's interesting is the number of analogies that you see people making to aviation or air traffic control or healthcare or these other industrial operational systems that we as humans have 50, 100, 200, 500 years of experience operating. And only in the last maybe 10 or 20 years are we starting to like look at, well, wait, how do they move, thousands of planes around the world every day and have such a low error rate? Like, how do they do that? Right. So taking, I think it's a great natural sort of evolution of bringing those ideas and those experts into our realm and trying to tease apart what's useful from what they do and applying it to sort of our context. The other thing that you mentioned is this shift from sort of project, like managing things as project, to sort of a product. And obviously that's a shift that we're seeing in a lot of areas of sort of ways that DevOps gets deployed, if you will. One of the things I think that's also sort of a natural evolution of thinking about the problem space from a discrete sense. I mean, we talk about continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous improvement. We're moving in a mathematical sense from discrete things that we do to sort of, we have to think about it through the whole system and in a continuous fashion. And that idea that we move from managing projects that have a defined start and an end, and we have discrete projects that we do, to this sort of continuous state of doing operations, improving operations and infrastructure, really speaks to not only how people have sort of found a way to do that, but also how do we sustainably do it, right? And one of the kind of secrets there is the way that you can sustain that transformation is thinking about it in a continuous fashion, not a discrete fashion, and thinking about it as a product that you evolve and manage and develop is a good way to do that.
Yeah, in fact, I would actually like to bookmark that topic. I just kind of queued up another topic just on that. But before that, I mean, I love your comment about like, boy, projects really are discrete as opposed to continuous. That's actually something I've never heard from before. But I love the fact that, I mean, I think you're at the leading edge of this, is that I think you're helping by going to these domains. It actually gives us a language to speak more clearly, right? And we actually know what the words are for kind of sometimes amorphous concepts. So kudos to you to getting your master's in on that. Anders.
It's funny because there's three things that sort of triggered in my mind as everybody else was talking about this, and one of them I think was actually from back when, before it became DevOps Enterprise Summit, when it was still just our Spark user conference, and two of our customers were there, and they were both gigantic mobile handset vendors, right? Extreme competitors of each other, but they were both presenting. And afterwards, they were both kind of chatting with each other and learning from each other. And so it kind of went from this sort of, looking across the room like, oh, there they are, to, hey, those guys have the same problems we do, which was kind of cool. So that's kind of the community aspect of it. And I had another experience just recently visiting now a customer, but somebody who had attended DevOps Enterprise Summit for the last 2 years and had come back, energized, excited, lots of plans for what to do. But it took almost 2 years to get the ball rolling at this, large enterprise, large financially related enterprise. So, slow moving for various good and not so good reasons. But the excitement of those 2 years of attending was enough to just keep them pounding away and make it happen. And that you got to do that. You got to keep working on this stuff. And then the third one, just kind of on the terminology, is we talk about this at Electric Cloud all the time about how we need the secret decoder ring, because everybody uses these words in different ways, and lots of other words in different ways. And one person's definition of Agile is very different than another's, I'm afraid. And all of these, what is a release? What is a deployment? And I think we're starting a little bit to evolve down to where these words mean a little bit more the same to more people than they used to in the past. I mean, I've had, we have customers where what we call an application, they call a platform. Just those kinds of things, right? Because you evolve your own terminology when you're in your own head, in your own company for decades, and solving these problems alone. And then all of a sudden, we all come out of our various corners and communicate with each other, and realize we're using the different, kind of slightly different words to talk about exactly the same thing.
Yeah,
and it's kind of nice when that starts to boil together into a common language.
In fact, I feel like I need to double check this one more time before I make this claim. But I mean, this is why I love some of the academic treatment, is that, as a way to sort of hammer out and normalize the terminology, right? In fact, I mean, I think in the first edition of Learning to See, like the lead time measure was actually the reciprocal of what we typically think of lead time. And it just shows that even in the Toyota community, some very well-known metrics were not had the same sort of phenomena. I think Anders, you mentioned sort of like the power of conservative orthodoxies, right? The organizational inertia of the ways of doing things can be sometimes very strong indeed. And I think the project funding model is probably one of them. I would actually love to hear any validation of that in terms of, what are the ways that project funding impedes the goals that you have, and what are the things that you do to cope with them? Does anyone want to go first? In fact, Anders, from your body language.
I'm already like jumping at the bit. I think we've seen this. Probably the most interesting way I've seen this is in the defense industry, quite frankly, where it's kind of cost plus accounting, and that's all project based, right? You don't do anything. You don't take a sip of water without assigning a project number to it, and that's been very challenging for them, because it's gotten them in, and I'm thinking about a couple of instances in particular where the mode that they work in is they pretty much don't pay attention to what they did last. They just sort of clone what they have now, and they keep they move the ball rolling forward, and when that contract ends, they move on to the next thing. And it is very difficult to get the continuity that you need to have, as Paul was talking about, just thinking about this as continuous operations, not discrete operations. That's a big mind shift set for people to get into, and when it's that sort of quanta of project that's driving the funding, it's even harder, right? Because who's gonna pay the bill?
Right, and these are for multi-billion-dollar, DoD weapons procurement programs. Right.
I mean, from the mundane to the spectacular, from the coffee pots to the satellite.
Right. Well, I was just reading an article, and this is not to make fun of this at all. It's just apparently the USS Enterprise, the first nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, is now stuck in dock, and for 4 years they're trying to figure out how to take out the nuclear reactor, and the cost right now looks like $4 to $5 billion. And so, an important project to end the life of this aircraft carrier. Mirko.
Yeah, I mean, sorry. So for us, it's a very pertinent question. So as a service provider, we always get engaged on projects, or mostly. And so in one of my first roles in the kind of DevOps space, we would go back to the project team and say, well, look, we can do something with automation, we can invest here, but that means that specific project obviously needs to be, is a bit more costly. Later projects will be cheaper. And then you interact with that project manager who only has that one project. So he says, well, no, wait a second. I'm not going to take an extra hit here, because all the benefit will be the next project manager, right? So I don't actually get anything out of this. And so we ended up having to negotiate so many times, and it's still true. We have to go back and negotiate and say, like, don't you guys, we want to do the right thing here. You just need to help us a little to actually allow us freedom. And that's sometimes a bit easier when you're in the house, right? Because you can just hide a guy in the corner and, he can continue working away at automation. If you're working as a service provider, it's all very transparent. Like, I can't just randomly have someone only half doing coding and the other half them spending on automation. It doesn't work.
Yeah, right. That's interesting, right? Especially when that transparency of you see the billable invoiced hours, right? Exactly. Sean, no, sorry.
So just one more comment, because you can see that in the latest DevOps report, right, where it talks about how sourcing is potentially a challenge for this, right? And it's obviously that's very close to my heart, but it's both sides, right? So it's a matter of how you engage with your outsourcer, that the culture and the action is aligned. And if you don't do that, and project is one of those fantastic ways that you can ruin a perfectly fine relationship.
Yeah. By the way, that was it's such an interesting finding, right? The functional outsourcing, like dev, you outsource dev to one place, test to another place, ops to another place. I mean, it was a pretty strong signal in the research, and it also does, I think, kind of validate some of our own kind of intuitions and things that we've experienced. Yeah, it's very interesting. Sean, any thoughts on project funding models?
Yeah, this certainly resonates. You know, being a large international bank, we still fund most software endeavors as projects, as opposed to kind of building teams that will run products. And you know, some of this is that you tend to have folks who are great at front office banking and running the banking business, and you tend to have folks that are great at technology, and the Venn diagram of those two doesn't overlap very much. You know, just different interests. It's not that one's not good at the other. It's just that someone who, I imagine that's going to change slowly over time, like most industries. But right now, there's still kind of a view that, well, we need now to go off and talk to technology and have them build some stuff for us. And so that gets funded as a project. And, the project is usually considered done once it goes live and it gets handed over to operations to run. So the whole kind of, 3 ways and fast feedback loops, there's maybe one feedback loop, but it doesn't, even with agile development and stuff, the whole process is laid out as kind of a waterfall-y sort of thing. And also there's this idea of fungibility then, that, we can have developers work on this for 6 months and then they can down tools and move off to this next project. And, as you can imagine, that results in some inefficiencies that are hard to put your finger on, but are really clear when you're in the system watching it.
Well, by the way, and so as a person who used to be responsible for a good part of the operations of, the banking operations, it seems like you were at the brunt of, as a shared service, spanning so many different, applications. It seems like you were living you felt very acutely like the project funding model. Is that just a figment of my imagination?
Well, it's certainly what ended up happening is because these things were built by teams that didn't have like long-term fluency built up on that particular product. If I compare it, say, to my time previously at Amazon, where they had more a service team model where you'd fund teams, not projects or even products. You'd fund a team to build a service or a product, and they would be on that, and the team would maybe change 5 or 10% a year or whatever, but they would continue building. And so if you go back and look at something like take S3 at Amazon, like there's probably people who've been working on that back since the beginning or very near. So you have this thread of knowledge and talent built up on how to run that you kind of lose if you have people come in, write the code, and then move on to the next code writing project. And so we're in some discussions. The nice thing is that Standard Chartered happens to be a place where people are at least willing to have the conversation and engage around, well, how do we make this better? So it's a fun conversation.
Oh, so, and by the way, one of the biggest surprises for me, I think, is just the difference in the elasticity of funding. This came through when I got to follow around Jason Cox from Disney, and I think the primary impression I got was, when you're embedded in the business and they want to do something, right? They'll find the money, right? A couple $1 million, they'll go find it. They say, go higher up, right? We'll just look underneath the couch cushions and we'll find the money. Whereas if you're in a shared service operation where you're stuck on an annual funding cycle, money is much harder to come by, right? That couple $1 million has to come from somewhere else, or rather, you're taking it away from someone else, unless it's allocated in the next funding cycle. Does that resonate with you? It
does, and kind of you mentioned being at the end of the value chain where you're kind of, taking on maybe some of the, project funding decisions, what ends up happening is that, no two software products ended up being exactly alike. So over a few years, we end up having to hire more and more people to take care of each one manually, because there aren't economies of scale, because just because you're good at managing one application in production doesn't mean you're necessarily good at managing another one, because they're not the same. And so that's one of the byproducts, I think, in some way, of the funding model.
Interesting. In fact, John Rostarski from Key Bank will be speaking as well, and he'll be talking more about just. The big ask for him was like, all right, describe how you view your job, right? How do you define what success looks like in your own head? Because I think we all are marvel and are dazzled by what he's done in terms of how you got Kubernetes, making development teams more agile. He's actually taking out cost. And, I was left with the question of like, on what basis do you prioritize? And so it's exciting to see him actually sort of put that down in writing, and, he'll be presenting on that in a couple weeks now. Any other thoughts on the pains of project funding? Okay.
Well,
yes, please.
Yeah, no, I was going to say this discussion reminds me of I was working with a Fortune 50 on, we were actually doing Kanban kind of agile training. And so we were trying to describe the concept of flow and why Kanban helps with flow and that whole kind of song and dance. And we got a question from someone, and they were like, well, okay, if we have all these Kanban cards, how do we assign the card to the particular funding thing? And it turned out, it took a while to understand, like, what were they talking about? And it turns out that like every service ticket they had to assign to a particular project that then they would assign to a CapEx or OpEx thing. And it was down to like 15-minute increments, right? And so I was like, well, do you have a good sense of how long a card takes you? Do you just want to kind of estimate it? And they were like, well, we kind of already estimate a little bit. And then I was like, why don't you just do the work and at the end of the day, fill the tickets in? And the looks that I got back from the audience, you would have thought I farted in church. They were like, oh, no, we can't do that, right? And so it was interesting to me to see this sort of like kind of tension between we have to account for the sip of water that we took. What project do we assign that to? And then also the people in the space. I've always respected Mark Schwartz. He was a CTO at USCIS, and he's at Amazon now, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Exactly. But so if you ever talk to him or see any of his presentations, he brings you on this journey around. Okay, yeah, we all get the rules, and he brings up that manual from the government that he had,
MD11,
yeah,
MD12,
or whatever it was, right? And he's like, okay, this is what the rules say, and to get the transformation work, this is what I did with the people, and it's right up to we're following the rules, but it doesn't make people account for every 5 minutes of their time. It's like, which project do I bill going to the bathroom to, right? And I think that sort of out of the box thinking for a lot of organizations that have to, justify their costs or their project budgets and those sorts of things. That's one of the things. There is some guidance on how to do that and do that in a way that doesn't, incur that cost on your team. That human cost, if you will, to account for that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I've become aware of this use case that I wasn't really aware of, but I now am actually telling speakers, certain speakers, think about this as the desired outcome. Someone said we had a meeting I set up a meeting with our head of security, and then for it was an hour meeting, and for the 30 minutes, we then watched the Capital One presentation. Topo Pradipal speaking with Jennifer, the head of the internal controls for Capital One, right? And they watched it together, and that formed the basis of discussion. It was interesting. Steve Player, who's going to be speaking on lean accounting, he relayed his experience of being in a software shop and sort of being thunderstruck that people were spending 25% of their time estimating their work. Mm-hmm. It's like, in what way is estimating our work productive, right? We're just thinking about working, not doing the work. And it was just, I'm hoping that will give us some ammo, to be able to have, some provocative conversations with our project management counterparts.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing, everyone on the panel has done this sort of walk the Gemba thing where we talk like in the funding meetings about how it looks, and then you go and look at what people are doing, and it's like they're getting around that, right? And not in a bad way. They're getting around it in a way so that they can do their jobs, right? So there's something to that where it's like, again, humans in the system, we know humans are incentivization machines. We find the incentives and we're good at gaming them out. So the thing is that I think, when we talk about, I always forget the researcher, but generative cultures versus, I know Jez and Nicole talk a lot about, toxic cultures, generative cultures, Westrom model. Yeah. You look at the generative cultures, it's not that they don't do the accounting, it's that they find a more kind of humane way to account for people are going to do their level best most of the time, and they're going to try to do the right thing. So how can we make doing the right thing also like not, the easy thing as well, right? We want to make that easy to get good numbers out of the system, but not make people account for, every millisecond of their day.
One of the things that I delighted out of was, there's actually when you fund teams that are long lasting, it's actually a very easy way to do the capitalization because you know what they're working on. They're working on one thing, and now you can get all the benefits of capitalization, but you don't even need to ask the team members what they're doing, right? So you can actually do it at the manager level, which I thought was delightful. Any other thoughts on project funding? Just a quick round. Okay, good. So one of the things that we spent time on the program committee thinking about is really how to help enable attendees to achieve their goals. I think one of the things that's in fact, let me just tell in a different way. Let me make the point, tell the story, and I'll share my observation. We did the first DevOps Enterprise in 2014, and then shortly thereafterwards, I got invited to Target. It was Heather Mickman and Ross Clanton. They said, "Can you come speak to our senior leadership team?" And I might have just maybe not read an email, but I was stunned to find that it wasn't just me. It was Jason Cox from Disney. It was Courtney Kisser from Nordstrom. It was they had actually invited a good chunk of the DevOps Enterprise speakers there, and the goal was to recreate the DevOps Enterprise experience for their senior leadership team. And the fact that they actually had Courtney Kisser from Nordstrom, a putative competitor, right? It was number 2 and number 5 largest retailers in the United States. That Courtney was there presenting to the Target leadership team. I mean, it was just stunning to me to what extent people in the community were reaching out to each other, that they were helping each other achieve their own goals. And I think I've seen that, in a much larger scale, throughout the community. So we put some thought into what can we do to really help attendees better achieve their goals. And we thought one of the best things that we could do was actually reserve a band in the programming where there are no talks. So we've done things like Lean Coffee, but whenever you go to a Lean Coffee, you're doing it at the expense of watching other talks. So we took out an hour of programming each day just to enable birds of feather sessions, Lean Coffee, ask the speakers, so there is no fear of missing out. And we're doing everything that we can to sort of break any perceived or maybe real velvet rope between speakers and other attendees. I mean, I've certainly been to conferences and even a book launch where it was pretty clear if you weren't part of the inner circle, you were hanging out with the commoners, right? Where
well, it is in Vegas this year. There literally could be a velvet rope.
Right, no, there will be no velvet rope. We're very cognizant of that. So, yeah, I'd love to hear your comments and thoughts or feedback on that. And specifically for me, as a conference goer, I remember situations where there are people I want to talk to, but there's just not the right way to. There's either the line to talk to the speaker is too long, or like they've been ushered into a different area, or there's a lunch group going, but you don't know what they're talking about. Any thoughts in terms of similar experiences and specifically the countermeasure we put in place to help foster those type of collaborations that I think we all enjoy?
Well, I can say one thing as a speaker at DOES, one of the questions you ask the speakers to come up with, which I had trouble with when I first, I was presenting with Kevin and Finn Braun. She was at Salesforce at the time. This was, I think, 2015 or 16.
Yeah.
Anyway, though, you asked the question, what are three
What
things
help am I looking for?
Yeah, right. And so we sat there and we thought about it, like, okay, well, what would be helpful? And I think we came up with some good questions. But the point is asking the speakers, what do they need help with? And then having them let the audience know that, I think, tips that general dynamic of speaker with all the knowledge to all of the people, you know, and imparting all that knowledge. It tips it more like, okay, I've got some knowledge and this may be interesting to you, but I am still human and I still have problems I have to deal with in my own organization. This is what I need help with. And that can be something that's very engaging for, like, oh, wait, I have that problem. And I'm glad to hear. I was going to also mention the lean coffees. I thought they were great last year. I'm glad to hear that not only you're doing them again this year, but you're solving the FOMO.
Yeah. Well, by the way, has anyone had any interesting interactions as a result of being a speaker and putting out that call to action? Like, here's the help I'm looking for. If you have any ideas on XYZ, I want to hear. Have you had any interactions on that worth reporting?
I can say just very briefly, Scott Prue, he saw the talk that I did with Kevin, in fact, and he ended up giving up. We had done a bunch of organizational research from Salesforce and Intuit. He gave us shared some data from his context and environment that was super useful. Yeah. So yes.
No, that's great. Oh, I love hearing that. Okay, I had a list here. Anders.
I think my favorite experiences tend to be when it gets a little bit more interactive, which almost by definition means a slightly smaller audience sometimes. But when you do panels and you get the audience to engage and people get a chance to kind of ask that question of, that sounds really awesome, but it won't work in my world, and here's why. And then you can sort of have that discussion of, okay, that can work. You just have to do this, or here's what other people have tried, or because a lot of times you never get past, people in the audience never get past the, yeah, but that would never work in my world. All of these wonderful things that you're talking about, this nirvana of continuous delivery and all of these things that'll never work in our environment, right? I hear that every day. And I'm sure we all do, right? I mean, this is part of the challenge of making this work in enterprise is getting through that, the inertia and the technical debt and the legacy and all of those things, and at the same time keep the lights on and the money coming in, right? So when you get into a little bit more of the real discussion, and it's not quite as much just kind of pontificating, which we're all pretty good at, I'm sure, but it's overcoming objections, in a sense, if you put it in sort of sales terms, right? Overcoming the objections of why I can't do this, why that doesn't work for me, and so on. Because that's where a lot of the value gets created. Because that is when people really do go back and can, start to hammer away at the brick walls that they got to tear down.
Yeah.
So for me, more of that is always good.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, in fact, and I think that's one of the reasons we're so experience reports are such a prominent part of the programming, is that I think there's no better way to handle objections than existence proofs. It's like, oh, I know you think it can't be done in a bank, but you should see Sean Norris's talk, right? Or I know you think you can't do it for defense contracting, but then you should see Robin Newman from Lockheed Martin talk, right? Yeah, absolutely. By the way, just one thing before we get to Mirko, Paul, thanks for that feedback. I mean, I think what I love about that exercise, like end your talk with like, here's help you're looking for, is that it's a way to give value to people very easily, right? Because that you're helping someone with their problem, right? And it's just you don't have to. You're not doing a consulting engagement. You don't have to write a proposal, right? It's like, hey, I know how to do that.
And just on a human level, it invites the audience to talk to you.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
You need help me.
Yeah.
Right? Now they have an excuse to come talk to you. And that's sometimes people look for that, right? I mean, just on a human level.
Yeah, I was going to say it definitely adds to that we're all in this together ethos.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Sean?
I'd say from kind of having been there as an attendee, 3 times now and speaking at the last one, that I think you've kept the size kind of like it's big enough to matter, that there's lots of people with useful information there, but it's small enough that you can still kind of mingle and mix and see people. And some of these other tech conferences that, I won't mention specifically, where you get like 30, 40,000 people at it. It's more like going to a football game than to a conference. And you're kind of just there to say you went, as opposed to actually learning cool stuff. And, I wouldn't want to see, even though it might be amazing, DevOps Enterprise Summit with 20,000 people it would lose something for me. So I like the kind of smaller, more intimate feel, even if it were to, still cost more than if it was 20,000 attendees. That feels like a better size. Also, the more concrete things people can kind of take back with them. I'm thinking like, the Accelerate book, or a way to, pick up signed copies of that, or the Accelerate State of DevOps report that they can go back and show, senior leaders in their organizations real tangible data. Like, that's amazing work. I've been giving it out, if I were having to pay royalties on it, I'd be broke. But if there's a way that, people, maybe it's their first time there, that they can get easily connected with that stuff and kind of go home with stuff that they don't just kind of get this big burst of adrenaline and then they get back and go, oh, now it's like, how am I going to start this, start a movement wherever I am?
Yeah. That's super interesting. By the way, Nicole and Jez, Nicole Forsgren and Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble, they'll be presenting on the 2018 Accelerate State of DevOps report. So that'll be very cool. By the way, I think like half, maybe a third to a half of our plenary speakers actually have PhDs, which is kind of interesting. Makes me a little bit envious. Awesome, Mirko.
Yeah, so I've been at the conference both as a speaker as just attendee, and both of them are busy, but differently busy. So and if you're just an attendee, then you're networking a lot more and talking to I guess, strangers. If you're a speaker, I think exactly what you said, the slide at the end actually makes it very easy for people to approach you. So you're very busy because by the time you're off stage, you have like 15 tweets from someone saying, hey, can we just catch up? I want to talk about how to work with vendors, or how to work with legacy applications, or, whatever the talk of the day was. And then you kind of, for the rest of the conference, you're trying to find time over a coffee break. And so I think that 1 hour band would be a fantastic opportunity to just start that up and saying, hey, yeah, look, we can meet in that break. And you can actually have a deep dive into it, which is fantastic, right? That's where you get all the value of.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I think when people bring up the term networking, I often kind of am a little bit dismissive of it. And yet, when I take a look at the DevOps Enterprise community, it is, no doubt, it is a community of phenomenal networkers. And not meaning like they can, talk to people and that they're extroverted and that they're, socially brave. I think, I see lasting friendships and collaborations that last years, right? And I think, to me, that is the mark of, a phenomenal community, right? It's like, people actively helping each other. So yeah, so it's not about just finding people to talk to. It really is finding mutually beneficial relationships, right? That, that help you, right, Mirko? Am I?
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes beyond, I mean, some of these people I literally only see once a year, right? And you get the opportunity. There's no, you immediately fall back into remembering what context they were in and start talking to them about what happened in the last year. And it's just fantastic.
Yeah, awesome. In fact, there's a project I'm just getting involved with that I'm really excited by, and that came from a similar interaction where this person has a PhD, focused on static code analysis, and there was a project or research problem that came up. I'm like, oh, I know exactly the person who should be the principal investigator for this. So, it's the same sort of dynamic, right? Applies to me, absolutely. By the way, there's one thing that we're going to be doing for the first time in Las Vegas. And it actually came about as a piece of advice from Dr. Richard Cook last year. And, he made the observation that when you're on stage telling your story, right, you're telling a very, it's the heroic triumph story. And there's a certain type of other stories that are being told over many drinks, right? About like, here's how I almost lost my job. Here's like something that, almost got me fired. Here's something that, I could have succeeded wildly if it weren't for this, jackass, XYZ. So we're calling it the DevOps Confessions session. So basically we're eliminating, we're taking out 15 minutes of the programming in the morning, and I've been collecting anonymized stories that I'll be doing two. I'll be reading them, And so one of them is, for example, I was up for a promotion 3 years ago, and I didn't get it. And so I got, the official response was that I wasn't strong on strategy. And they had some concerns about the way I was managing my people. And I almost started looking around, but I got some advice that there was an offer made to invest in me. So I took them up on it. I got an organizational coach assigned to me. And 3 years later, I've never been more optimistic about my career. I have 3 times as many people working for me. I'm involved in some of the most strategic programs in the organization. And so the lesson I learned was a couple things. One was I learned I needed a support system because I was facing this imposter complex. Maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. I realized I need to create a support system for the people that work for me, right? Who's there looking out for their, for them when they go, when they hit the wall. And that had I left, I would have missed out on some of the most important learnings in my career. I thought that was interesting. There was another one that, a story that said, there was recently an incident where corporate IT, they removed the ability for 1,000 developers offshore to use USB drives. So which are required for them to do their daily work. And the only way we found out was that in the daily reports, we just noticed that this team just stopped, creating artifacts, right? And so they asked why, and they learned that there was a, corporate IT lockdown, but 1,000 developers were afraid to actually tell anyone because there was such a culture of fear that, you can't actually speak up. And so the security person was out of town, but 4 days later, we came out with a plan. We could give them USB drives, but they had to be wrapped in plastic. And so there was a duffel bag containing 1,000 USB drives overseas, right? And people distributing these things. And he said, and that is why I'm so disgusted with corporate IT. I know that if I have to get anything done, I have to do it myself. And I've been in front of the executives 3 times now for excessive charges on my credit card. And I keep telling them, if you really think what I'm doing is wrong, fire me. And they have yet to do it. And I'm now starting to get this reputation, however, that I'm like the ivory tower theoretician, that I don't actually do any real work, that when I do things like this, they roll their eyes and they say, Sheen must have read another book lately. And that's why he's spouting off the way he is. And I'm trying to learn how to do the right thing, but not trigger the ivory tower response from people. Anyway, so I thought this is interesting just because there are so many reasons why we can't share stories like this. And I'm just excited that people are willing to share these and have them shared in an anonymous way. Any reactions to that? Mirko, you're laughing.
I love that. I mean, it's so true. I mean, that's part of the fun of going to a conference, right? Is to then afterwards ask the question and figure out, scratch a bit on the story to hear the bits behind it. Right. And I remember Jazz was speaking here in Australia at a conference, and everyone was talking. Everyone talked about the unicorns, and he's like, once you work in those unicorns, you realize they have really good marketing departments to make sure that the good stories get out and the bad ones stay in, right? So it's great to get some of these not so pretty stories out because that's reality, right?
And there's some. I think when I've been sharing them with the program committee, and each time I learn lessons. I have people share what they learned from it, and it's always interesting to hear what they learned from it. That's just I learned from hearing that. Any other reactions to that?
Well, one thing I'll mention real quickly is that I think too the noticing our reactions to those stories are super interesting because I did my master's with healthcare people and pilots, and right, so they would tell stories about situations in the cockpit or situations in a hospital, and certain people, like I have my pilot's license, so when the pilots would tell a story, I'd be like, yeah, that's normal, like whatever. And the doctors in my class would be like, oh my God, I'm never flying again. Right? Now the doctors would tell a story about what would happen in the hospital, and they're like, yeah, that's normal. And I'd be like, oh, I am never going to a hospital, right? So even in the context of these stories that we share in our own IT sphere, it's interesting to notice which stories make us go, oh God, I'm not sure, right? Versus which stories are like, yeah, that's like my workplace too. There's actually a lot of sort of encoded data in there about, how we're similar and dissimilar and how we react to those stories of failure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also, it's good for people to hear that too, because I think it's easy for people to sit in the audience and think, well, gosh, we do a lot of screwed up things, and these people are obviously perfect. We have no chance. We shouldn't even bother, right? It can be a little bit discouraging. So it's very humanizing and normalizing to hear when people tell these stories or hear of these stories, right? Because you realize, you know, the unicorns, their horns aren't on straight either all the time. Right? So
there's lots of duct tape.
Yes, it's worth the effort to make it, you know, to make it better. Even if you think you're absolutely the worst, it's still worth the effort. So.
Awesome. Well, we'll see how it goes, and I'll keep you all apprised. I may actually be reaching out to you for to elicit more stories and lessons. Well, hey, thank you so much for being on this panel, Paul, Mirko, Sean, Anders. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you all in a couple of weeks in Vegas. In fact, Sam, let me turn it over to you to close. And so, Anders, Sam, thanks for making this all possible.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining. We really would like to have you join us. You've heard some of these stories already. These and more are the stories that you'll hear. The hallway track could be maybe one of my favorite tracks at the DevOps Enterprise Summit. It is a safe place for you to go and learn and unlearn things that you may have learned. And if you register now, you use the code DevOps300 at the checkout, and you can save $300 on your registration. So we are selling out of tickets. They are going very fast. We do have some that Gene has set aside for folks who really want to come and join us. So please use that code DevOps300, and we'll see you all in Vegas in just over a month. Can you believe we're almost there?
All
right, excellent. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, all. Cheers.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right. Thanks, guys. Really good seeing you, Mirko, Sean. Thank you both very much.
Yep. Thank you. Until
next time.
Guys.
Take care. It's good seeing you, Anders. Bye, guys.